I take the opportunity to invite our panelists, Mr. Anshul Sharma, co-founder, Redwing Labs, and Mr. Siddharth Saneja, Head of Finance, SCM and Strategy at Intellicar Telematics. This discussion would be moderated by Mr. R.K. Narang, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Drone Federation of India. A very warm welcome to each one of you. Over to you, Mr. Narang.
Good evening. Uh, India is passing through a very interesting phase. And the theme of this year's event is World Class from India. Now, remember, world class requires not only the software things which India is known to, but also the hardware. Hardware is becoming a key element of graduate hard, how to make it soft. Because NASCOM has a soft linkages, but I would say hardware is hard. How to make it hot so that it becomes a sector. There are two sectors we are dealing with. One is a drone sector. Second is the electric vehicle sector. Both are emerging sectors and both are promising sectors. And luckily, both sectors are being led by startups, predominantly startups. And what we have realized is startups struggle hard, they get deep into the problems, find a solution. Whereas when the larger companies come, their aim is to ensure their business interests are met. And they have very less appetite for going deep into technologies. So that's why these startups and MSME provide as critical language, linkages to niche sectors like drone and electric vehicles. So in the drone sector, India has set a goal of becoming global drone hub by 2030. And it is also aggressively pursuing development of electric vehicles. Most importantly, India wants to become a developed nation by 2040. When you have to become a developed nation, you need to have a much larger independence of critical supply chain. So I think this becomes a critical pillar of it. And last year in the drone sector, it has been year of policy reform. However, in order to become an IP-led, high technology, high value drone hub and deliver world-class US products from India, we require research, innovation, commercialization, and most importantly, ownership by key stakeholders. Technology initiatives are new to India, and in both cases, they are yet to take off. Also, there is a problem or requirement of enabling ecosystem like certification standards, testing, to build a robust industries in electric vehicle and the drone sector. So today we have two very promising startups. Anshul Sharma, a co-founder of Redwing, drone startup from Bangalore in India. Interestingly, his journey did not start in India. He is based in India, but his journey starts from abroad, or rather bird's eye view of Indian drone industry, who's getting into the sector. And second is Mr. Siddharth Saneja. He's a chartered accountant from Intellicar, Telematics, and electric vehicle startup, also from Bangalore. And I would urge speakers not only to share their journey, but also focus on. Yeah, Anshul, how did you were also part of NTU Singapore and accelerator program with Techstars USA VC. Could you share your learnings, Anshul, and in addition to other, your entire discussion? Anshul.
Sure. I hope I'm audible clearly.
Anshul, right? Can
I can hear you now.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Narang, sir. So I think the way that we look at the drone space is basically into three generations right now, right? The first generation companies were basically born between 2010 to 2013. And the first generation of companies in the drone space were focused on the military side of applications, right? So building surveillance drones for that application layer. Then came second generation of companies which were born in that period of 2014 to 2016, 17, basically, right? By the time second generation came, enterprise applications were much more, were at a higher adoption rate. So as a result, second generation of companies started to focus on mapping, thermal inspection, survey mapping, mining, all of that category, right? So quite a bit of GIS category was explored in the second generation of companies. And when we came up with, in the period of 2019, we view ourselves as a third generation drone company in this space, right? Which is where we are focusing on delivery of vaccines or healthcare products by using drones. So I would classify us as a third generation drone company, which came a little later into this overall space part. So as a result, like our learnings has been that because we were third generations, we had to start from a regulatory space which was a little bit more evolved. Ironically, we had to start from a country called Papua New Guinea, which is basically an island above Australia. So that's how our journey basically got started with by delivering polio vaccines for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Gates Foundation. And from there on, thankfully, India's regulations, which changed last year, has been supporting this, new third generation of companies. So that's how our journey got started. And the first basically fund to really back us up was this fund called Texas, which is based out of Colorado. And what they do is a similar model like Y Combinator, which is except that it's global, so it gives entrepreneurs the freedom to operate from their home countries. So as a result, our first accelerator exposure basically came from Texas, and our learning by going through a very general accelerator program was that regardless of what you're doing and regardless of what space you're building, there are certain governance structure that you need to do very fairly early on when you're trying to build a company, right? Which is that how do you think about product? How do you think about fundraising? How do you think about hiring? How do you think about culture? So rather than it being a random activity, it just provided a pretty well playbook and helped us, get to that stage pretty early on. So that's been our journey so far, I'd say.
So, drone is a very, evolving sector. Now, how do you see Indian market? Now we are focusing on hardware. What are the challenges you see in Indian drone manufacturing hardware sector?
Sure, I think.
Anshul?
So I think one primary key challenge has been on the component side, right? That the components of the supply chain is considerably still flowing through China. And I think we are in a 3 to 4 year journey in which we're going to start seeing indigenization of that component happen in India. And that is primarily because the new policy has kickstarted enough incentives for corporates and larger entities to start taking ownership in this sector rather than just being, let's say, a user in this sector. So pre-liberalization, although companies like Tata, Adani, and larger companies were participating in this space, but they were not owners in this space, right? Whereas post-liberalization of the drone rules from August 2021, we're seeing much more capitalized being mobilized towards that sector, right? Which has been the main reason why this sector is developing at a much faster rate than what it was pre-liberalization part, right?
So what do you think about ecosystem, drone manufacturing ecosystem, testing, standards, certification? Any challenges you see when you grow? Today, the limit is 500 kgs drone certification. Do you think we need to move forward or they are satisfactory?
I think from a policy perspective, we're pretty good. It's the major challenges are in the implementation layer, right? But it's understandable because number one, those teething issues are there, but I think those teething issues are getting solved as more and more companies are going through that certification process, and that processes are basically getting streamlined. Overall, I would say that I would say that there is less work needed from a policy front. There is more work needed to just iron out that processes, go through that processes, and structure those layers out so that it becomes more and more streamlined. But yeah, I think given that drone space has been a very late boomer in India, every drone entrepreneur has built patience basically so far. So maybe we're just used to the patience part.
Do we have enough testing facilities to test now? I'm sure all of you must be thinking of expanding to bigger birds in due course. Do you think we have the airspace and the infrastructure in terms of takeoff facilities, landing, and other on-ground facilities?
Yeah, I think so. The green zones which the government has designated, right? So the premise over there is that if you want to conduct your own specialized testing, then you can either do it vertically or you can do it horizontally, meaning that you can collaborate with 5-6 drone companies essentially to form up a drone testing facility, which can be there for a particular class of bird. Or if you want to do it vertically and you're building something very high IP, then you can do it sort of in-house part. So I think we are choosing to go in-house basically. So our testing space is just for our purposes, and similarly there are other companies which have chosen to have a designated test location and make that investment basically to make that happen.
Okay, I have few thoughts about it. When I look at ASA or FA, they have a dedicated research programs undertaken by FA and ASA. In India, the regulatory framework is taken care of, Ministry of Civil Aviation. They have done a wonderful job. But the corresponding technological initiative as a nodal ministry which undertakes such program, don't you find there's a little bit of gap and we need to fill it up, or somebody has to be made a nodal ministry and there has to be a roadmap, the way the world moves in the drone sector with other leading countries?
Yeah, I think that is needed, but there needs to be enough demand from this industry itself, right? So, as an example, FAA, the US airspace regulator, the reason why FAA has published out a roadmap now for air taxis is because there are companies which have gone public in the US. Forget about raising private funding. There are companies which have entered into public market, which are building drone taxis essentially, right? So that helped the regulators as well to see that this is a real industry coming up. Similarly, I think India will perhaps see the first public drone company going hopefully in the next year, right? That one drone company has plans to essentially go public in that space part. So I think we have enough templates that if someone wants to build an air taxi from India, which 1 or 2 companies are doing so, then yes, I can understand that it will be pretty challenging for them to construct a lot of gaps that are there in between. But if you're participating into other spaces in the drone industry part, then I think we have a little bit more clear visibility towards that area.
Okay, I now come to Siddharth. Siddharth, you being a chartered accountant, you are looking after critical aspects of a new domain, electric vehicles. So could you tell us your journey, your challenges, and your recommendation? And I will urge Anshul to pen down some of the recommendation he has. I'll ask you last before we close on this session. So Sid, could you share your thoughts on these issues?
So first of all, thanks for the opportunity, and specifically on this topic, hardware is hard. Basically, so since we are very much into the EV space, and we are an IoT telematics company focused on EV and battery space predominantly. So what we realized a year and a half back was a quote from Alan Kay hit us, like, if you are very serious about your software, you should have your own hardware. Because if you don't have a hardware which is that capable enough, no matter what software you have, the performance will be bottlenecked. So we worked for 5.5 years before with a lot of OEMs, and that's where we understood that we have to make our own hardware, and that's where we saw those challenges, solved it, and now successfully deploying it as well. So from the first challenge is the design time and the design facilities which are available. So for example, India, it'll be like strange to know that the PCB it's very difficult to manufacture PCBs with a drill size of 0.1 mm. So for example, even if you have to design, so ours space. So basically, the major challenge is the prototype time increases a lot because you always have to go to China for every prototype which you make, and in design, like, it keeps on fluctuating. So once you'll come, then you'll bring it up, then you'll realize, oh, this is missing. So the overall period of the development and go to market is months, which can be weeks if we have those capabilities in India. So that is one of the major challenge which we faced, and that's where the recommendation on this front would be that government bringing up schemes and design specific schemes. Like, you know that there are a lot of MSME schemes available, but the amounts are like up to 15 lakhs, credit linked schemes and all. The amount has to be increased, and design specific incentives are to be provided, and such kind of manufacturing capabilities are to be built in house in India. That is first challenge actually which we faced. Then coming out to the other part, like from the semiconductor point, like Anshul was pointing out, right? Components is a great issue to procure and source. And currently, since 52 weeks lead time is quite standard across the industry, the semiconductor industry. So India is on its way to bring up its first fab. So India, in the last budget, has announced a fund of $10 billion for setting up the fabs. But here also, it's a long down process. So setting up a fab is not easy. What major components which are required is ultra pure water. The water has to be very clean, and a continuous supply of electricity. So continuous supply of electricity is, again, if there's a fluctuation of say 1 second also in this manufacturing process during a fab, the loss is in millions. So that, and to set up a fab, like setting up one fab requires at least $6 to $7 billion. That the versus the amount which is sanctioned is 10 billion overall. So that's something which we have to look into from a policy per se. Like, are we doing it in the right way, and should we increase that? Because as of now, the consumption of semiconductors, so we are heavily reliant on China, Taiwan, and basically Hong Kong, all these countries for import of semiconductors. Today, our semiconductor market is somewhere around $24 billion, which is expected to grow because of the EVs to $150 to $200 billion by 2030. There's an actual research which has happened on this. So that kind of imports is what we are looking at if we don't have our own fab, and so it's a cascading effect, Mr. Narang. It's like, if you don't have your own fab, you will go for import. Import will take time, designing will take time, lead times are an issue. And for example, if my EMS is lined up, the production is lined up for as per the schedule received. Now, if the components don't reach on time, the EMS will allocate someone else. So 2-3 weeks your timelines will be delayed. After that, your customer timelines will be delayed. So it's a cascading effect which can be solved through our own manufacturing. And meanwhile, till the time that, so it's a long shot. It will take at least 3 to 4 years to go there. So what we can do exactly till then as a stopgap solution? Everything we have to do, look at from a stopgap solution as well. So as we are importing, so there are a lot of improvements which can be done on the import process. Like, a lot of times you will see customs, material gets stuck for a week, for 2 weeks time, because there's one commissioner or the supervision authority attached to it. So all those manpower related stuff, if we are able to sort it out and get that material on time at least, is something another issue which will help the development of the hardware in a very good way.
What do you think about, one of the critical element is the battery. In fact, it is both for the drones and you. How much is our dependence on battery cells and other things? And what is the availability of battery testing facilities in India, global, standard laboratories?
So, Mr. Narang, on the battery side, so we are highly dependent on importing the cells. So basically, there are different types of batteries in the market. The old-fashioned batteries are called lead-acid batteries. They are made out of lead. The new, so lead batteries are not smart batteries. They can't communicate. But a battery which is powered up by lithium is a one or an LTO. So LFP, NFP, LTO. These are the different types of batteries which are available in the market, made out of lithium ion cells. So those are the batteries which can communicate and pass real-time data to the cloud. On the battery side, if you would have seen, there are some fires, all those incidents happening. So one of the major issue again, which is linked to the hardware development, is a lot of like 90% of the people in India, they don't manufacture their own battery management system. It's all imported from China. So a battery's performance, so it's very much dependent on the way the BMS functions. A BMS has to be a smart BMS which can take those calls. For example, if a battery is made up of different cells, if one cell also doesn't perform, the load goes on to the other cells and battery performance is going off. The voltage issues will
I just want to understand, we are so good in software. Why do we have to depend on imported battery management system? What is the role of our academia? They are, in fact, sometimes I get a feeling they are doing, all are doing the same work with, limited value addition in the real gap areas. Am I right in my observation? Or probably
Yeah, Mr. Narang.
missing the thread.
Yeah, Mr. Narang. So actually, that's where
There are a lot of people working in electric vehicles. There are a lot of academic institutions. Yeah, go ahead.
So one more big challenge which we face in this market is the cost. India is a cost-driven market. So the cost to do the R&D, to do the design, to actually make a good product is not valued as much as the basically anything you sell here. First, our question asked will be the cost, and then if the cost targets are met, they'll go. Everyone goes on the quality aspects. So I think that is a psychological thing which we have to change as a country, where we can first focus on quality, because long term, if the quality is good enough, the cost automatically is recovered in some way or the other. So that is a change.
My question is, you are getting a quality in India. You are getting an assembled make in India product, whereas the startups may not be able to make. So how do you cross that threshold? How do you, ensure that despite all the challenges, our startups or our companies are able to compete globally? What is that trajectory? One or two points you would like to recommend? And same question, my question is also to the, Anshul. How do you cross this threshold of, cost and the research and development? Go ahead.
Yeah. Sid, do you want to go
Finish
first?
then.
So on the basically one of the major impact which I see, like I discussed, is the R&D investments. So the startups have to be backed up enough by the government and by the likes of the funds to invest in those R&D. We have great minds. This is proven. The Indian minds are a great. India has great minds.
Let's come down to specific. Which government, which scheme, what do you want? Specific, if you have any recommendation.
So MSME, for example, there are a lot of capital linked schemes which are not, so the amounts are very less. On R&D, there are schemes which tell you can replace your R&D machinery and up to 15 lakhs. So those amount of, the first is the replacement. Actually, it should be for new investments as well. And secondly, the amount of 15 lakhs is not that enough.
You give your wish list. What is your wish list? What should be the amount?
I think minimum for a startup who has a stable revenue. So there can be some criteria which can be chalked out. What is the past record? What is a stable revenue source? What is the background of the founders? What is the background of the team? And based on that, up to 4-5 crores is something which can be considered.
Okay, take your point. I come to Anshul. Anshul, what is your recommendations?
I would recommend that DST starts, allocating capital away from research labs of universities to either spin-offs from startups or teams which have incorporated themselves as a startup company and then working on programs. And I would recommend that capital should be at a baseline 500K, basically, which is about 3.5 CR, basically, to start off with. I think there's a we have a leaking bucket in terms of so many researchers working on that next flying car, basically, and just wasting essentially government's money on this part.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you. There has to be coherence in research with the knowledge gap within the country. I think that part is what which has emerges out, and we have to ensure that we do not waste or repeat that research effort. 2-3 points I will raise. Then the last line I will ask from you is, Sid, just one line question: which is a ministry which leads the research and development in EV? I know about drone. I just want to know about EV.
Can you please repeat your question?
Which ministry leads the research program for electric vehicles?
Which industry leads the so basically
ministry.
So for automotive, it is Department of Automotive. So
Department of
yeah. So basically,
do they have any do they have any research programs for dedicated to EV?
Yeah. So currently, there's a lot of research going on the battery packs, where the BIS standards and all those are under the draft policy. And NITI Aayog is taking care of these things right now. So NITI Aayog has formed all these.
NITI Aayog is not a ministry. It has to be led by ministry. Is there any ministry?
So BIS is one, right?
Okay, fine, thank you. So I think there are 2-3, our Anshul has given is some good suggestions, and EV also there are few issues which have been raised. One is what all we can learn in terms of accelerator programs. We need to make it little more focused, little more research oriented, little more outcome oriented, which covers the entire gap what a startup have fails in terms of how to raise funds, how to scale up, how to go into production, from prototype to production. So these are some of the inputs which have come, and Sid that earlier brought out some of the issues related to PLI scheme. We need to have a design-based PLI scheme. And I personally feel in drone sector, we need a little more ownership in terms of research and technology initiatives. So while certification and standard in the drone sector today, the certification is limited to 500 kg. The higher category where drones are coming, we need certification of more than 500 kg. The trials and integration of drones in Indian airspace, we need that new initiatives in that sense. And I think we need in the both drone and electric vehicle technology development roadmap, we need an entire specific technology-based roadmap after identifying the research gap. And more importantly, we need little more focus on creation of an enabling ecosystem in terms of testing sites, formulation of standards. Now, standards in our case is more of an academic exercise, whereas globally it is a trial, testing, and research combination where the outcomes are analyzed to make standards. So I think we need to move into proactive standards formulation, and there is also a need of some form of standardization. And last point which emerged amongst our deliberations are we need to have a focused research and development program. The research and development program has to be covering on the gaps in technology. Once we are able to address, I think we will be able to do a much better job. Do we have a time, or we can? So as we have a last line from Sid and Anshul, you have any recommendations for your industry and way forward? You can just cover that point.
So one
last line,
point,
just one line. We don't have a long time.
So I think we are going in the right direction, and we just have to figure out a few things, and we will be on track.
Thank you. Anshul, anything from your side? Last line.
Roadmap with fixed timelines and accountability.
Thank you very much. Very important point. Some of the ecosystem, academia, roadmap, and nodal ministry. These are the takeaways of today. And of course, a very, very focused accelerator program. Thank you. Wonderful having two of you here on very, very important sectors which our industry is moving forward. And all the best for a more vibrant electric vehicle and drone industry in India. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your valuable insights with us.